calling all sort of out, newly out, or fully out lesbians. We are going to Provincetown.
Wing Women's Weekend, October 16th to 20th, 2024, is your opportunity to join our crew and enjoy Provincetown's annual Women's Week.
One of the biggest challenges we hear from the lesbians we work with, especially those of us new to this community, is how intimidating it can be to connect with other LGBTQIA plus women and to find that all-important queer community.
I know, and you all want to be connected to the community so much and to meet new queer friends. And, hey, you never know, maybe even meet somebody special. But we can also know that it can be super intimidating to do these things alone.
So let us be your co-pilots as we enjoy some amazing activities in Provincetown, one of the gayest small towns in America, during their annual event for queer women of all ages.
Enjoy meeting new friends with us as your wing women.
It's the queer event of the year you won't want to miss.
Details at www.wingwomensweekend.com. That's wingwomensweekend.com.
Hey queer friends, are you ready to be inspired? Welcome to Season 5 of Coming Out and Beyond, a podcast that shares stories from the LGBTQIA plus community. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hi, this is Anne-Marie Zanzal, and welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond. I am very excited today to welcome Trent Clifford to the show. Trent is a poet, playwright, speaker, spiritual director, abuse survivor, proclaimer of truth, and reclaimer of faith. His debut book, Reclaiming Faith, Learning to Reimagine Church, God, and Ourselves, is now out, and he hopes it will provide space for individual and collective healing for those who choose to engage with it. Trent, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I feel welcome. Thank you for having me.
So one of my first questions that I ask on this podcast is, tell me your story. And I know when I ask this to gay people, it's like, oh, well, there's a lot. So, Trent, I would love to hear your story.
Yeah, I think that why it feels like a lot is you have to decide where your story begins, right? Do you start at the beginning? Is your coming out the beginning? Where does the story start? And so I think for me, particularly in context with this book, my journey really does start when I came out. I grew up very conservative Baptist. I have a fantastic family, but so many of the atmospheres in which I grew up were deeply conservative, deeply homophobic. I attended a Christian school in addition to being part of a church. So there was really no context in my life in which you had the option to be queer, truly. And so I was in my first year of seminary. So I was 22. I had been dating a woman for 5 years. And she and I were deeply compatible as friends, which is why we lasted so long. We got along swimmingly. We were best friends and we just called it dating and we didn't really know any different. But when you live in the South, after 5 years, people start to ask questions. When are you getting married? What's next? When are you going to take that next step? And so like the good Christian boy that I was like, well, obviously it's time to take that next step. And so I did. I proposed to this woman that I was dating and immediately felt like I had made a huge mistake and did not really know why. Because, I was raised to believe that being gay was a choice. So from super early on, I had chosen not to be, stuffed it so far deep down that it wasn't something I was even struggling with at a conscious level. So I proposed to this woman who I intended to marry and had no idea why it upset me. I just knew something was wrong. She was elated. I wasn't. And I knew this isn't how I was supposed to feel. And so I spent the next months digging deep, looking inward, trying to figure out what was going on inside my own body and mind. And finally started to put these pieces together that, wow, this was something I'd been repressing. So many things retroactively made sense that never made sense before.
Give me some examples.
Yeah, I mean, probably the best example is I can count on one hand the number of times that my girlfriend and I even kissed.
Well, I was thinking about that because, yeah, like you were going out for 5, you were like basically a gay guy with his best girlfriend.
Yes. I mean, honestly, right? And everyone looked to us and was like, wow, that's what we want our relationships to be like. Because we never thought I was the best boyfriend in every capacity except, you know, being attracted to her. I mean, I did the gifts and the anniversaries and I watched cheesy movies with her and cried on the couch with her. I mean, I was like the perfect boyfriend except for the fact that I was not attracted to her.
And didn't want to have sex with her.
No, certainly not. I mean, purity culture, though, provides such a good excuse to not have those feelings.
Right. And so a lot of times people feel like the most chaste person ever. I've had talked to so many women because they like when they were in purity culture, raised in conservative Christianity, and they're like, look at me, this chaste thing is really easy. I don't know why people so struggle with this.
Literally,
you're not dating.
I just thought I was better at it than everyone else. I was like, I don't know why this is so hard. Everyone says it's so tempting. You're just not as tight with Jesus as I am. Like,
well, it was funny because I was married for 27 years and like I never cheated on my husband once. Never. Didn't even think about it. Didn't even occur to me. But I do remember looking at his friends going, no. But it's sort of funny too. Ironically, the only person I ever hit on in our friends circle was a woman, and it was right when I was coming out and I had too much to drink one night. But it was like I thought I was so chaste. I was looking at the wrong tree, you know. I was just not
yes.
So you started to feel, okay, so you're like in this self-examination period.
Yeah.
Where like you're like the best boyfriend ever, and you just asked this woman you've been dating for 5 years that, you know, it's time, right? You're in the South, and you're like, why don't I feel happy and excited about this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was like the worst day ever, and it should have been the opposite, right? And so, yeah, it sent me into this really difficult time. Within a few months, I pretty much knew what was going on, but I didn't know what that meant moving forward. So I broke up with her. She took it as well as any human can take that kind of news. And that's why we dated for so long. She was genuinely just one of the kindest people on earth. And so we broke up. Everyone is horribly confused about why this has happened.
What a gift you gave her. Like, what a gift you gave her. Because, first of all, one, hopefully she's with somebody that now finds her attractive and wants to have sex with her, right?
Yeah.
And two, she didn't end up married to a closeted gay man for years and years and years.
Yes.
I've actually talked to some women that have been, and it's incredibly hard and painful. You know, so you've given her an incredible gift by breaking up with her.
And I think even in the midst of the pain, she recognized that at some level. And that's why, I always say she's the best human that it could have happened with, because she received it with such grace. And she said, thank you. Even at the time, she was like, I would much rather you realize this now than 3, 5, 12 years from now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it sounds like you guys handled it the best you could.
Absolutely. As best as you can. Absolutely.
And you told her you were gay.
Yeah, I did. Oh. Yeah, I told her the truth. There was no other reason. And it's truly the only scenario in which it's no one's fault. Like, she didn't do anything wrong. She was wonderful in every way. And I wasn't lying to her because I didn't know. It wasn't even something I was grappling with during our relationship. It just hit me like a ton of bricks at that moment.
What Well, it sounds like, so we we talk about something called catalyst, but I'm going to use it in a different interpretation here. It's like that was a catalytic moment for you where you realized,
Yeah.
I can't do this. Have you figured out why you suppressed it for so long? Like,
Yeah, I kind of
besides
mentioned it
her.
in the beginning. I mean, it just truly wasn't an option in
Mhm,
any context. And the
mhm,
messaging around it was that one of the reasons that this was so sinful is that people were choosing to be that way. That
mhm,
your sexuality in that context was a choice. That God created man and woman, this is what marriage is. And so people who are gay are people who have given into temptation. So at a very early age, I quote unquote chose not to give into temptation. And I can look back and realize that I made that choice and suppressed it deep down. But like in the moment of being adolescent, it didn't feel like I had chosen anything or that I was suppressing anything. I just had decided that this is who I was. I was waiting for the right person. And,
mhm,
and I finally found someone with whom I shared a deeper friendship than anyone
mhm,
else. And I was like, well, this must be what love is because I feel stronger than I feel about anyone else. And I
mhm.
didn't have a frame of reference really for what attraction even felt like
Right.
because I didn't allow myself to feel that with anyone.
Mhm, mhm. So you told her it was heartbreaking for both of you, I'm sure.
Yes.
And what
And
happened?
I spent the next year figuring out what this meant for my life. I was already in seminary. I was planning to enter into vocational ministry. And so suddenly I was in a place where, okay, if I'm gay, what does that mean? Can I be gay and be Christian? Even if I can be gay and be Christian, can I be gay and be a minister of faith? That feels like an entirely different question. Then, even if I can be gay and be Christian and be a minister, can I be married and enjoy the type of love and happiness that I've always wanted to feel? Am I allowed these things if I
Mhm,
want to still be a person of faith at the same time? And
mhm,
so I embarked upon about a year of just wrestling and reading and considering and combing through the Bible verse by verse, page by page, trying to figure this out. Like, where did the hate come from? What was actually said and what wasn't? And I came to the realization that that I can be all that I was created to be, and that it's good, and that it's beautiful, and that it's necessary, and that these parts of myself don't stand in opposition to one another like I was taught, that they can stand in harmony because it's who I am. And if I truly believe that God created me, then I have to believe that God created me gay as well. And I think that God is so sad for adolescent me. I think that God mourns the years that I had to spend smaller than I really was. And I think he looks at me now and is just beaming. And
mhm.
but it took me a long time to get to that place where I could feel
Well,
that
yes,
way with
because
any authenticity.
you're in a Southern Baptist seminary, and can I ask you, was it Dallas Theological?
It wasn't.
Okay, that's pretty conservative too.
It is.
And my question is like, did you talk to
Did I
him?
talk to anybody?
Because what you're talking about right now, like I can like, like hey, can't be gay, can't be a minister and be gay. You didn't want to be celibate because for those who don't know, some conservative denominations will accept the fact that there are people that have been born and made homosexual, but they choose that they're required to be celibate, which is just crazy, but that's what the teaching is. And so all those things, all of a sudden, you had all this privilege all your life as a white straight man, perceived
Yeah.
man, And then all of a sudden, all these doors started to close at that.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What was that like for you?
It is so strange. Even now, it is strange to think about the people and the places who so celebrated you at one time. I mean, I was a children's pastor at one point. I was a youth pastor. I was the person inside of the church that people like pointed to, like, wow, what a man of God. And overnight, I was no longer any of those things. I wouldn't be allowed to be on staff at either of the churches that I previously worked at. And it's so strange for those experiences to be retroactively stripped from you. That these things that in one way, in part, made you who you are. Like, these are formative experiences we're talking about. And yet now they're tainted by this retroactive bigotry that you're having to sort through. So it's really, really strange to have so many experiences that at the time were so positive get flipped entirely on their head overnight because this one part of who you are somehow counterbalances everything else that people know about you.
Were you shocked?
Yes and no. I mean,
you knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, I did. I mean, that was the hardest part about coming out, right? I told my girlfriend, fiance first and broke up with her and told her the truth. I told my family to mixed reaction, but coming out in any sort of public way was really hard because I knew that it would change quite literally everything.
Right.
And so, I mean, when I look at my life, there's a really clear divide between coming out before and coming out after. There's a singular friend that I have from before to after. It was a full restart in every way. Everyone that I knew left, fled. The few that stuck around just kind of slowly trickled away as it went because they thought that they were more accepting than they actually were. And as time went on, couldn't handle it. And so, I mean, it's a full re-release on life for me coming out. There's no transfer from one period of life to the next.
You know, I would say that is true for me. And I came out, at 50. I was married for a long time. I had kids, all that stuff. And I do not have anyone except for family members. I do not have anybody from my old life except one. And she's actually really good. She's got a queer daughter. She's got a gay daughter, so she's fine. She's a really good friend of mine. But that's it. Everybody else either disappeared immediately or just, attrition. They just sort of, it wasn't. And also too, I can't, is it because I'm gay or is it just the natural ebb and flow of friendships too sometimes, but most of my friends are from the last 10 years of my life.
Yeah.
Especially my queer friends. All my queer friends are from the last 10 years of my life.
Absolutely. I got married last year. And my whole wedding, everyone who was involved, everyone in my wedding party, everyone who came, were from just the previous 3-year period of life in which I was regrowing and reframing and becoming who I am today. But, when people think of those milestones, they're thinking, who are their old friends? And wedding parties are composed of college buddies and childhood friends that have been around forever. And for me, it was just the people who showed me who they were in these last few years and were willing to support and come alongside and celebrate all of the newness that was happening. And, moments like that, you see how fresh all of it really is, because it feels like a lifetime in some ways, but it's not.
So as you beginning to figure this out, you said you told your family to mix reactions. Now, only as religious as you were?
Yes.
Okay. Because sometimes people embrace faith differently. So their mom or dad, so your parents were very involved in the church, Southern Baptist ministers? Either one of
Not
them?
ministers. But no, my family is all very deeply religious.
Okay. So what happened with all of them when you came out?
Yeah, so it was hard. My parents reacted really incredibly. My dad especially was just basically like, okay. I mean, there was just not really much to it, which I think is the best possible reaction, truly. That it's just not even, it wasn't even a thing for him, not really. My mom struggled like at a theological level. I mean, she'd lived her whole life being taught that it was wrong. But to her credit, she was able to kind of hold that up alongside what she knew of me and trust me with it. And so I think even to this day, she may not be fully on the same page as me theologically. However, she doesn't treat me or my husband any differently. I mean, she is the most loving, wonderful human being. And I think she's a beautiful example of we don't even necessarily have to agree theologically in order to treat each other well. And and it's I think it's a beautiful reminder because we spend a lot of time wanting to bring people into the fold of affirming theology, that queer people are made in the image of God. And I think it's important. And I'm willing to have those conversations until the sun comes down with everyone. And yet, even if my mom isn't fully on that same page, at some level, it doesn't matter because she gets it. You know, faith is about loving folks, and she loves me and she loves my husband. And if I didn't know her as well as I do, you would never know that she wasn't affirming because it doesn't affect how she treats people.
I'm just curious what she thinks is going to happen to you after.
She doesn't think it has an effect on my soul. That's what's most interesting. Even if she's not fully there theologically, she believes in me enough to not worry about that aspect of it. And I think that's the huge difference, right? And I'm glad you asked it because I think there's a difference between someone who's afraid that I'm going to go to hell and someone who's like, I'm not sure that this is God's plan, or I'm not sure that this is God's intention for created order or marriage or fill in the blank. But she's not worried that like we're not going to get to spend eternity in heaven together, right? And I think that is a big deal and speaks to the fact that knowing someone who's queer can make such a huge difference because she knows me and she knows my heart. And she's like, there's no way that you are not saved. It doesn't compute for her that could even be possible.
So after this whole experience with, coming out, and I'm sure like learning how to date in the gay world, which is like really, it's a different culture.
It's horrifying. And like I don't say that like it to be mean about gay culture. I think dating probably in general is mildly horrifying. But like really figuring that out for the first time is hard. And you have all the added pressures of being a gay man who's still a man of faith, which is kind of a weird conundrum in the gay world as well. It wasn't great.
How old were you when you started dating?
23.
Okay. So you were still young.
Still young. I did the whole gay dating thing and I met my first husband. And this is a big part of where I end up writing the book. So it's really pertinent and is a part of my journey. But I met my first husband. We dated, we got married. And it ended up being a really pretty terrible relationship. Even in your intro, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And my first marriage was pretty abysmal in a lot of ways. He wasn't physically abusive. And I say that because I think that when people think about domestic violence, that's what they think about. And yet domestic abuse looks like so many different things. It's mental and it's emotional and it's spiritual and it's financial.
And sexual too. For some
yeah, absolutely. It looks like a lot of different things. And I was married to him for 3 years. And, was able to get out and was able to escape and was able to find life on the other side of that. But part of what landed me in that relationship is I didn't have a frame of reference for what a gay relationship looked like. And it's easy to say that a healthy relationship is a healthy relationship. And yet the dynamics and the baggage of two gay men in the South entering into a relationship together are not necessarily the same as what a heteronormative relationship would look like. And I didn't have a reference for what this should or shouldn't look like.
Was this your first serious relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Because when people come out and when they finally sleep with the correct person for their sexual orientation, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It is amazing. It is, I mean, it just rocks your world. And we in the later in life community, and it's like a second adolescence, because the first, and I argue that actually it's first, because the reason why you could be so chaste when you had purity culture, like was your bitch, is because you were like, it was performative for you, like being attracted to girls and being attracted to the opposite gender. But once we meet the correct gender for or correct person, I don't want to say gender, correct person for our, it just blows our mind, because all of a sudden everything we've ever been told, like about love, about passion, about all those things, all of a sudden like fall into place. And we're like teenagers. We really, really are. And so it makes a lot of sense that you ended up with somebody that, it was your first person, you fell in love, with the values you had as a young, Southern Baptist boy. You don't sleep around, I completely understand why you married him.
Yeah. And, it would have, the story could have gone a lot of different ways, but exactly what you're describing, my first time with this person ended up being a person who then took advantage of all the things that you're describing, right? And so he took advantage of the fact that this was a new experience for me. He took advantage of the fact that I am someone who loves and was passionate about him, and was passionate about making a relationship work, and was passionate about staying and being in it for the long haul, right? I mean, those are the kinds of people that abusive personalities seek out, because they can get away with so much more.
Well, it's interesting because my wife is the first person I've ever slept with, and that didn't happen.
Right. And that's why I say it could have gone differently, except who it ended up being for me. Right.
And that's why I just said that, because my wife, I remember when, she was we were talking some show recently, and she said, I never considered myself, like, sometimes you can find people that are like gatekeepers to the queer community. And she goes, I never considered myself somebody that knew more than her. I just considered myself a native in a land that she was not familiar.
That's a really nice analogy.
She's been out for like 40 years. So she came out at 20, and we're both 60 now. The thing is we were in our 50s, and she was able to she always said, if this wasn't going to work out, like in the long run, if this didn't work out, I would have just some amazing memories of being with you. And so I think we were both older, and I think that's one of the reasons why we could also work through a lot of the stuff. And also, she's fundamentally a good person too, which helps.
It does.
So you divorced your first husband. I am so sorry that you had to go through that. And so you started, okay, I'm going to date again. And so you started dating again, and you met your second husband.
I did. I met my second husband, who I have been married to now for almost a year. And it was so different. I mean, from the beginning, when you have been in an abusive relationship, it's amazing just the little things that shouldn't be a big deal And then when you're dating someone in a healthy way, suddenly that it is a big deal. And I mean, while my now husband and I were dating, I would comment on certain things and he would go, I mean, I'll take the compliment, but you realize that's normal, right? And it would be little things like he listens when I talk. And that sounds insane to even like make that a thing, but he would remember things that I said. Like I wouldn't have to repeat myself 20 times because he listened and cared to hear what I said. Whereas in my previous relationship, it was always about him. And I had to remember the things he said, but, listening to me was optional. Or once he moved in with me, my now husband, he unloaded the dishwasher. And like, I have a distinct memory of like, I came home, I remembered I had I had turned the dishwasher on, so I needed to unload it. And I went and it was empty. And I had this moment of utter confusion. Like I was like, where did they go? Am I going crazy? Did I already do this? And I realized that, he'd just unloaded them. But I had never experienced a relationship in which you shared responsibilities like that.
It's so funny because honestly, I say the exact same thing because I was married to a man for 27 years and I was married to a very heteronormative man. My role was to take care of anything besides his work. He worked. And I worked too, but my job was to take care of everything. And being in a queer relationship now with my wife, like when we get ready for a party, we both get ready. She doesn't ask me 35 times what needs to be done, even though and so like being with somebody that like, where you share the responsibilities of running a household is amazing. And it's life changing.
Mind blowing. Yes.
And that's one of the wonderful, wonderful things about most queer relationships. There's some that are not like that. And I really want to lift up what Trent is saying. It's like something we don't talk about a lot in our community because it's sometimes so hard to just survive. But domestic violence is very present in this community. We don't talk about it a lot about it. It doesn't always include physical violence, but much of what Trent said. And what I want to say is that it's because of all the trauma that is placed on you. So you've got two traumatized people trying to create a life together. And that can be really, really hard for those couples. And if somebody also is not mentally healthy or abusive, then it can become, even if you are two really great people, sometimes the trauma gets in the way. Your trauma butts up against each other. So I'm really very happy that you mentioned it, because in case anybody's hearing this and thinking, oh, this relationship doesn't feel right, it does happen in our community. And so we want to know that.
And I think that our community sometimes experiences a unique pressure around marriage, right? It's something that we don't take for granted because it hasn't even, in my lifetime, I couldn't have gotten married in Texas, right? And so we have this pressure, I think, sometimes of feeling like we have to make it work. Because if it doesn't work, we're proving everyone who doesn't think that we should be able to get married right. At least that's how it feels. And so I think for me in my marriage, that it's part of what kept me in it at least a little bit longer than I otherwise would have stayed, because I didn't want to prove correct those who said that this shouldn't be allowed. And it kept me in an abusive situation where people don't think like that. And those who do, you're not going to change their mind either way, whether you stay or not.
Well, and the thing is as we both know, in conservative churches, there are so many straight couples that are divorced. And because a lot of times, especially in very conservative faith traditions, people get married very young. They don't know themselves when they get married. And a lot of times those first marriages end quite quickly. So tell me about your book.
Yeah, so my book started I started writing it about a year and a half ago. And it really started a year after I left my first husband. And the reason it started then is I had reached a point in my kind of healing journey of feeling like, okay, I've done the work that I set out to do. And what I mean by that is after I left my husband, I really wanted to reclaim my life. That was my mission for that year afterward, is going to the places that were important to me and supplanting memories of him with new, better memories, not letting him continue to rule the day, but finding ways to reclaim what was important to me and kind of kicking him out of the things that I didn't want him to be part of anymore, metaphorically speaking. Going to my favorite restaurant that he and I had gone on dates to, and going with friends, and making this now a restaurant about friendship, not a restaurant about a past marriage. And there's lots and lots of examples like that. I mean, even just your home, you have to take down the things that remind you of him and put new things up that reflect your own personality. I mean, there was so much reclaiming that took place in that year. And I remember reaching a point where I felt like, okay, I've done this. And I don't think that the work is ever done, to be clear, but I reached a point where I felt really good about what I'd accomplished. And then there was this kind of nagging voice inside of me that was like, are you sure that you're done? Mm-hmm. And I had to sit with that and figure out what I was trying to tell myself. And I realized that I had not approached faith with the same intentionality after kind of this divorce that the church forced upon me when I came out. And I hadn't approached faith with the same intentionality as I had my life after I left my husband. And there's so many ways in which that parallels.
Yeah, your metaphor works really well, because what you had to do is get rid of the parts of the faith of your faith that were, it's called it's deconstruction. You had to get rid of the parts of your faith that caused you pain.
Yeah, and I think that we talk a lot about deconstruction, and it's important to dismantle what it is you believe and figure out what are the parts that are essential and what are the parts that were just kind of used to control or used to create fear and misunderstanding. But then I had to figure out, but I think there's a next step. Right? For me, I was like, okay, how do we move beyond belief systems or theology or the things I know to be true? What does it look like to reclaim faith as a practice when the practice of faith was so harmful to me? How do you engage in something like prayer when so many people growing up tried to pray the gay away, right? How do you engage in worship when most contemporary worship songs on the radio take you back to dimly lit chapel rooms full of teenagers raising their hands that were horribly cruel to you growing up, accusing you of being gay? How do you do these things when they're so trauma-laden? And so that's what I set out to explore for myself, is how do I reclaim faith as a practice? And that's the journey that I detail in the book.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things you did?
So, I mean, I mentioned prayer and worship just now. So those are some of the examples I can give. I have a chapter in my book about prayer. And what I talk about is a practice called centering prayer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I wish we talked about more. But the idea is that you simply come before the divine and you just are. It's about being as opposed to doing or asking or saying the right words. And for me, there's something so freeing about prayer being a place where I can simply exist in the divine's presence, because for so many years, who I wasn't enough, or there were parts of myself I had to deny. And so this idea that I can simply exist in my fullness with the divine is healing and it's restful. And the practice itself includes finding a word for yourself. And it can be any word and it can change too. And my word right now is flourish. And I think that there's something really magical to me about that word, this idea that I want to grow and cultivate and blossom. And so, it's a form of meditation, and the goal is to simply empty your mind and exist with the divine for those few moments. And when the thoughts try and enter in, as they inevitably will, because emptying your mind is hard, you use that word to refocus and re-empty. And the metaphor that I like to use is you use the word like a broom, just kind of sweeping the mental debris away, because I think that we have a tendency to get really mad at ourselves when we can't accomplish something. We're like, oh, why can't I focus on this one thing? And so you don't want the word to be this instrument of force, right? You're not like beating yourself up about not reaching this empty, serene place. Your word is just this instrument of gently prodding those other things away so that you can rest for those few minutes and soak up the divine love that's yours to claim.
I have been a meditator for 20 years, and I've taught meditation, and your description of it's a sankalpa, which is what they use. It's focusing on a word or a phrase and acknowledging that. I love the metaphor of the broom. I talk about it as clouds. They're going to just float by. You can look at the cloud for a while, but eventually you want to come back. Yeah, use either breath or a word or a sankalpa or a phrase, and have people go back to it. And interestingly enough, in my later in life groups, meditation is one of the things I always offer once a week, because what you're describing is like really a lot of the work of Kristen Neff, who talks about fierce self-compassion. And the three pillars of that is self-kindness, shared common humanity, like getting with other people that get this, like you and I get this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that it's part of multiple intelligences. And I think some people just have a more spiritual bent than others. Well, some people know the natural world so intimately. It is like they were born with that. And the third part is mindfulness, and really meditation teaches you mindfulness, centering prayer. I've used centering prayer, and when I was 15, I used to pray the rosary every day. And like, what 15-year-old girl does that? But now it's just part of who I am.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that. I do think centering prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it, it's all in the same family.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's such a trauma-informed way to go about that type of prayer or communication or meditation, because it's about you being enough for that moment. And I think that's so healing.
So you spoke about worship. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So in my book, I talk about poetry as worship. I think that it can be really hard when you're re-entering back into spaces of faith to participate in corporate worship. I think that a lot of times the songs can be triggering, whether it's words or phrases or memories associated with some of these songs, as it is often the case for me, I think. And so I'm not someone who likes to say things I don't mean. And so that can make corporate worship really hard sometimes. And so for me, I realized, so I'm a musician. I love singing. I'm a theater guy. I mean, the arts are part of how I express. And I've always loved the idea of artful worship. And so singing for me was a huge part of how I experienced church growing up. And so coming back to faith, I thought that I really missed the songs, the music. And what I realized was that I actually missed a creative way of interacting with the divine. And so it's not music for me right now, but poetry is a way that I can worship with a pen on a page and I can say exactly what it is I feel, exactly what it is I mean. It becomes a liturgy of my own creation, that these words are a means of accessing divine encounter in a way that corporate worship can't be for me right now. And so I think that the key is finding something that accesses a different part of yourself. I think creativity is a huge way to encounter spirituality. And so for me right now, that's poetry. And I think that that's really what worship is it's recognizing divinity through creativity. If we believe we're creatively made, then we too are creative beings. And how do we engage that in a meaningful way?
Well, I have read also that you find the divine in imagination.
Yes.
Find the divine. And so that really speaks to me too. I know one of my clients who I'm gonna text right now because I'm gonna be 15 minutes late. I have to meet her. But she is a poet. And after she came out, she's really gotten back into to writing her poetry because that's where she finds the divine. So have you gone back to actually a denomination yet or anything like that?
I have. So I didn't attend church for 3+ years. And when I started dating my now husband, he was very involved with the church. Church was very important to him. It's one of the ways that we really connected. And he has a lot less church baggage than I do,
Yeah.
which is a really nice balance.
Yeah.
But so it was really important to him to find somewhere to attend. And so we're attending a Baptist church in town. It's an affirming Baptist church. Obviously, it's where we got married. The pastor there performed our ceremony, and it was beautiful. And we feel really at home there. But even now,
is it an American Baptist?
So I think they belong to Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, CBF, and Alliance of Baptists would probably be the other affiliation. Yeah. And it's been really healing. It has. I think that when I first started going there, that it was definitely more for him than it was for me. And he knows that. But, I sat there week after week, and it has slowly really worked on my heart in some beautiful ways. And I think that, and I'm pretty clear about this in my book, I think you should not put yourself in a pew if it's going to be harmful to you. And there were many years in which if I had gone, it would have been harmful and it would have set me back. And even when I started going with him, I think that it was very different for me to sit with him in a pew than to go sit by myself in a pew. And I think I think being able to go with someone that I loved made it feel different than if I'd walked in there by myself. And I think that you have to recognize your own readiness on this journey. And I think it's better to wait indefinitely or just never go back if that's what's best for you.
Well, and I can understand being with your husband. You had an ally in there.
I did.
Yeah, so
I had something even better than an ally, I mean, truly.
At the very least, you had an ally in there. So that if it was a poor experience, you could just leave and you both could leave and you would, but it wasn't. And so have you ever thought about going back into ordained ministry now in another denomination?
No. I don't think that working full-time in a church space is what I'm called to anymore. Okay. I think that I was always correct that God called me to ministry. I think that's true. But I think that it looks like something very different than what I once would have thought it looked like. I think what I have been able to do theatrically in many ways has been ministry. This past weekend, I wrote a play that was produced that compiled research from 25 victims of domestic violence and told those stories on stage. And that is ministry. You know, I mean, it was incredible and it was beautiful and the response was fantastic. And so I'm not willing to give up that work. And yet this book has really opened the door for me and has been an exercise in trusting God to say, it doesn't mean that your ministry does not include church spaces. You know, this book has already opened the door for me to be in a number of pulpits in the coming months at different denominations and different congregations. And that's such a gift. So I don't foresee myself working full time in a church setting. I hesitate to say ever because sometimes God likes to fool you, but certainly at this juncture, that's not my plan. And yet I think that I am blessed to be in ministry. I get to write and I get to speak about things that I think are really important and that I wish I had heard growing up. And so I am hopeful that the words in my book and in my upcoming sermons are healing. That's my goal anytime that I write or speak, is that someone will walk away changed in some small way for the better. And so, yes, I am called to ministry, but probably not with a full-time clergy robe anytime soon.
Okay. And as far as you know.
As far as I know, yes.
You know, it's so funny. So I, as I'm ordained UCC, and I served a church here in Nashville. And I was an intern for about a year here. And at the end of my intern, they asked me if I would apply for the full-time job. And I'll tell you, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have killed for a job like that. And when they asked me, I was like, no, I don't. Because honestly, the work I do now is so fulfilling to me. And going into a church and also to deal with all the problems of being in a church, as government has been in church ministry. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of thankless work. A lot of times, I was like, I don't need that kind of stress in my life. I just don't want to do that. So, Trent, did you have a coming out song?
You know, it might be the cheesiest coming out song you've heard, at least in a while. But I was a Disney kid growing up, as I think many of my generation were. And I loved Mulan. First of all, I loved all the Disney princesses because I was a little gay kid who didn't know that I was gay. But I loved Mulan, and I loved the song Reflection, because there is something about this idea that you see something in yourself that other people don't see, and maybe you don't even understand what it is you're seeing, but you know there's something there. And I just remember growing up just jamming that song in my car by myself, just belting it at the top of my lungs. And I think when I came out, I was like, that's one of the silly things that you look back and you go, oh, that makes so much sense now.
The refrain in that song is, when will my reflection show who I am inside?
That's right.
So I can understand that. My oldest two children, who are a little bit older than you, used to recite the whole dialogue to Mulan in the car. So the whole dialogue.
I love it.
I have raised a lot of Disney kids, so I know all those. The new ones I don't know, but the ones from your generation I know. So a book or a movie or something that really profoundly changed on how you look at things.
I was asked recently if there was a book that affected my writing, and I think maybe that in some ways this question and that question are the same. I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle at a time in my life where it really mattered to me to read a woman so proud of her own queerness and write about it in a way that wasn't linear, but that was simply someone telling stories. you know, and I think that for me, it opened up this world of, oh, memoir doesn't have to be biographical because our lives in so many ways aren't linear. Like we might live them linearly in terms of chronology, but the way that we experience our own life is not really that. There's something much more circuitous and chaotic about it. When I think about my life, it's in snippets and vignettes and the way that these different things connect in ways that have made me who I am now. And being able to think about my own life that way and share it in that way instead of being bound by a timeline, I think really mattered to the way that my own ideas about my life story progressed, and I think impacted the ways that I decided to tell aspects of my story in this book.
Well, I think that when you realize, not when you realize you're gay later, and you know, for my generation, it was their 30s, for your generation, it's their 20s, you know, I think that you can't tell your story in a linear, because the story becomes like when I tell my story, like, because I get asked to tell it all the time, but when I tell my story, it's in vignettes, and it's linear because people appreciate it that way, but it's not linear to me.
Yeah.
Like, you know, because there were like, it's just, there's a lot of like, oh, and then we went that way, and then we went this way, and then we went that way, you know. There's very few people, some people do. I think that's why sometimes people like the order of the church, because there's such, like, it's much more straight and narrow, you know, and this is what we do, and this is what we do, and this is what we believe. And it gives people comfort a lot.
Yeah.
How do you describe your life today?
Full. Yeah, it is. I think I've had a couple of restarts in my life. The first one with coming out, the next one with leaving my husband. And this period of life is still only a few years old. And a few years ago, I never would have imagined being a guest on a beautiful podcast, talking to someone about my life and this book that I've just written, coming off of a weekend, as I just mentioned, where a play that I wrote was also performed. I mean, I have had the opportunity to tell my story in ways and to audiences that I never would have thought possible. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And then, I mean, not to mention that I'm going to be in a pulpit and like, probably it won't burn down. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. I can't even, like, there's a part of me that like can't even fathom myself standing behind a pulpit talking to people. Like, it just doesn't even compute in part of my brain that that's a thing that I will be doing here in the next couple of weeks. Like, that's crazy. And I mean, a few years ago, that wouldn't have been in the realm of possibility, and yet here we are.
Well, you weren't ready yet. Things tend to fall into. I always say that when we are moving in the direction of our calling, the universe moves very fast.
Yeah,
I think,
and I feel that
it's really, really quickly, you know, and being able to, I can completely understand what you're talking about, like. How is this my life? How is this my life?
Yeah.
Because, like, for example, like, I own my own business. I work from home. You know, I can't believe that. You know, I help a lot of people, which is really, really satisfying. And, you know, and it's what I was meant to do. But, you know, I had to go through all those other things. And, you know, Trent, you're 30, you will probably have 2 or 3 more restarts in your life. I don't know about what. It's not always going to be about your romantic life or your partnerships, but there will be other things that will come along that you'll and also people tend to have a lot of different careers. So you may end up in those minister robes yet. You never know.
we will see.
We will see. So how do people find you?
So my book can be found at reclaimingfaith.org, and there's a lot of my related work there. They can also find me at Trent Clifford Writes, and those are probably the best couple of spots to find more about me and this book and the other work that I love to do.
Well, thank you, Trent. It was wonderful to talk to you today, and you affirmed many of the things that I already believed. So it was nice to hear your story and hear how far you've come.
Well, thank you. I thank you for having me, and it's nice to talk to someone who does affirm so many of those same things. So it's been really delightful.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA Plus Stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.